Hello and welcome to Tomlin's Harmonica podcast, where I'll be hanging out with players and teachers and having conversations loosely based around harmonica. This week's guest isn't a harmonica player or teacher, but he is a fantastic musician who I have the pleasure of working with on a regular basis. And I thought it would be really interesting to chat about something a little bit more general rather than specifically harmonica. And that is the topic of practice and how to practice, why you need to practice, how to get better at your instrument. So this week's guest is my good friend Vid Gobac, who is a drummer, pianist, guitarist, bassist, composer. He's just an all-round amazing musician, a great pleasure to have as a friend, and has some really good insights about music in general. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Tomlin. I don't think I'm half those things that you said, but I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
It's absolutely my pleasure. So just for a little bit of context before we dive into chatting about music, we are recording on the 8th of July. Mm-hmm. This is the first time that we've actually been allowed in the same room together.
Oh my goodness, yeah, that's right, actually. I mean, yeah, we even hugged when we saw each other.
Yeah, I'm not sure we were supposed to do that.
Oh, no. Okay. Oh, well. I guess I'm going back into lockdown.
I think it's okay. According to what we've been told by the government, I think that we're okay hugging.
Yeah.
Socially distanced.
It's like just exposing like ourselves and like to possible repercussions that could lead to all this. But anyway, yeah, it's actually quite nice to be in the same room and to work not on through a Zoom/Skype meeting. That it's actually quite nice to be in the same room as you.
Yeah, it's very cool. So I know that you've been working on a lot of different musical things during lockdown. I feel like you're a little bit like me. It was kind of an opportunity. What have you been working on?
I think the nice thing about us being in lockdown, I think, well, obviously, let us address the wonderful adverse effects that lockdown brought to us was the fact that our gigs just vanished. And, you know, lots of people can take that and be like, well, this is the end now and let's give up music and throw in the towel. But I thought that, well, this is the one time where I know that if there aren't any gigs happening, what can I do musically to help myself become a better musician? And practice is a really good thing. And not just practicing with my instrument. I love playing the drums, I love practicing the drums, but I got to work on my composition, my production skills. I got to like level up my skill set, if you want to call that. And yeah, I've been working on some wonderful arranging for the bands that I run and I do MD work for, and got to do a lot of arranging in the process. I've really been trying to hone in on my horn writing capabilities, and yeah, just having a really good time with that. But obviously, just trying to find at least a few hours in the day to sit down with a pair of sticks and be like, I need to practice this. I just need to get my hands back to where they were. Mm-hmm. So no, it feels good. It feels good. I think I've found some good time in all this.
Yeah. So let's just give it a little bit of context. How long have you been playing drums?
Oh, I've been playing drums now for about 14, 15 years. I was quite late into drumming. My first instrument was piano, and I started playing at the age of 4. So I've been playing music, I think, for about, I don't know, like 22 years now. Mm-hmm. Just like, and yeah, and the drums I took up when I was about 14, 15, and I took them on quite seriously, so that's how long I've been playing for, yeah.
So you've been playing all that time, and yet you still need to maintain your skills with sticks. You still need to sit and practice with a drum pad.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's the tricky bit with music or any kind of skill. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing it for. Everyone always says, "Oh, it's like riding a bike." But if you just stop riding a bike, and then you jump back on. You always realize when you first, like those first couple 100 yards of riding your bike, you're just a little bit shaky. You're not always like you don't want to go just as fast as you used to. You want to be cautious. So it doesn't matter how long you've been playing. You could be playing music for 50, 60 years professionally. If you don't practice, it will get away from you.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think one of the biggest misconceptions about skills in general is amount of time spent doing something equates to getting better. So you hear people who are like, oh, I've been driving for 40 years. I'm a great driver. And then you get in a car with them and it's absolutely terrifying. And you realize that they learned how to drive. So they worked hard at learning how to drive. And then they did the same thing for 40 years. So they got more experience, but they didn't actually think, how are my skills improving? How can I improve my skills? And I think that the same is true of musical instruments. I'm sure you have a lot of students like this, but you have these people who kind of come in and, you're a young guy, but I'm sure you've had students that are older than you who've been playing longer than you've been alive. And you ask yourself, how have you been playing longer than I've been alive, but you've not kind of got to a level of amazing musicianship?
Yeah, I think what you're definitely touching on is I think there's a concept of learning bad habits and like living in that bubble of replaying your bad habits over and over and over again, where like I've seen guys with like, shocking technique, and they've been playing with that shocking technique for years and years and years, but like that has contributed to, like, yes, to their sound and their feel, which has, a very unique kind of aspect to their playing. But when they say, oh, I want to get better, I want to sound like this, or I want to sound like that, I'm like, yeah, that's because your technique is getting in the way of what you want to sound like, and because you haven't sat down and effectively practiced. And I think that for me was something that I had to learn very quickly. Sitting behind my drum set and playing to my favorite tunes and just grooving along, or like shredding fills and chops that I've always had, is not practice. That is doing the same thing I've always been doing over and over and over again. It's like watching the same film over and over again. It's like, hey, Vid knows so much about that one film. It's like, but then I'm not considered a film guy. I'm considered a guy that just knows a lot about that one film. I think that's what people get stuck into. I mean, and it's like skills like music, and you could talk about any craft really, whether you're into woodwork, or whether you're into writing or designing. If you see it as, well, I just need to like check off the box, that doesn't mean you've learned that skill. It just means that you've achieved it once, but now do it again, just as good, over and over and over again. And that's where we kind of run into, guys giving up because it's like, oh, I don't see any progress. That progress comes years down the line. It's not a thing that happens immediately.
Yeah, I think, well, we'll definitely talk about progress coming later in a little bit, but I want to come back to something that you said about people who've been playing with not necessarily great technique for a length of time, and that sometimes translates to having a unique sound. And how do you address that issue when someone does want to improve, but they're afraid of letting go of what they perceive to make them a unique player?
I think you have to, so when I address my students, or when I address people who like want to get better, and and let's say we run into this case study of that person that wants to change, but they've ingrained this way of playing into their system for so long. You have to kind of bring it, or at least bring the point across to them that it's going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to have to be okay with being uncomfortable for a very long time, because it took you a while to learn that thing, that habit that you've created, but it's going to take a lot of time to unlearn it. And when I say unlearn it, as in like, you want to gain good technique. People always see it as like, oh, I don't want to unlearn my habits. No, you always have your habits. They are there, but you're stuck there. It's about being versatile. It's about being free to do whatever you want on your instrument. Again, if you want that, people want to play that same groove, that same blues track over and over. You can't stop them. But it's the guys that want to change. They need to feel okay with being uncomfortable. I remember my first lesson when I went into university. I had been holding my sticks wrong until I got into my first year of university, and I never knew that. The guy who first taught me how to play drums, he had come from more of a classical background, and he had timpani training, and he had taught me like a bit of a timpani-esque style drumstick grip, which caused me to be a very tentative drummer when I started playing, and I didn't have any power behind my strokes. And I remember my lecturer on the first day was like, okay, I'm going to show you how to hold the sticks, and this is going to suck for a very long time. You're going to feel like you cannot play the drums for a few months, and then it's like learning how to walk again. It's like, imagine someone teaches a young kid how to walk with a cane his entire life, and now he's 22, and it's like, okay, I'm taking the cane away from you, and I go to walk. They'd fall over. It's about relearning, this new motor skill that you've never had before. I think that being okay to be uncomfortable is my main point I think I want to stress there.
Yeah, I think that the discomfort in practice is really, really huge. And one thing that I think is really important to remind people of is that having great technique, it doesn't limit you. It does exactly the opposite. It opens up so much more freedom in your playing. I think a lot of people are worried that if they learn very kind of mechanically perfect movements, that's going to make them like a kind of musical robot. And it's not true. It means that you have all the skills so that you can then let go. You don't have to think about your technique while you're playing.
Yeah. I think that's there's always like, I always see these like 2 or 3 guys that whether it's at a gig or whether it's at like a clinic I've led, and guys are always telling me, it's like, yeah, like I don't want to learn what these guys are learning. I don't want to be, like there's like guys talk about it on YouTube and on so many music podcasts. It's this like Berkeley style, jazz funk guy that comes out, like he's just like another Berkeley clone, and they all sound like these these very similar jazz funk guys. And I mean, like everyone wants to sound like Snarky Puppy, everyone wants to sound like Wolfpack, everybody wants to sound like the same kind of sound, but and people think that, well, if I learn this, I'm going to sound like a clone. It's like, no. These concepts were designed by teachers, not because they want to make you clones. They have designed these concepts and perfected these concepts to give you ergonomic freedom. When I mean ergonomic, least effort in for maximum output. So like, why do I have to use my wrist in a certain way? It's like, well, it's because that you don't have to work so hard when you play, so you can play longer and therefore like not get fatigued. It's like you don't want like a layer of fatigue inhibiting your playing and your creativity. That's why that system is there. So people are always skeptical of oh, if I go to school, it institutionalizes my playing and I become a robot. No, it's there to help you. It's like, imagine you've never learned a language before, and now you have these tools to learn the language, like all the vocabulary and the grammar and the nuance of turning it into something completely beautiful. Because like that's what essentially we're working with. We're working with a language. If you only know how to speak 3 or 4 words, that's the only thing you can say.
Yeah, absolutely. And that thing of kind of lightness and not overexerting yourself, that's typical across all instruments. It's like if you can be relaxed and not have this layer of tension in your playing, then you're completely free to do whatever you want on that instrument.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that's something I probably say that more than anything else to my students. It's kind of relax, play less hard. You know, let your shoulders drop. This is the thing that's kind of interesting. Is, you know, I'll have a harmonica student and I'll say, okay, so I want you to relax your knees and let your shoulders drop. And there's all this system before we even get to the mouth that's touching the harmonica. and you got to remember that there's this foundation that your body is built on, you know, right from the floor up. And if that's all in alignment, then your body is free to move in its most effective way possible. And that must be even more important on an instrument like drums, where every limb is doing something at the same time.
It's extremely mechanical. But you're right, like going back to basics with like just don't hurt yourself with your posture. I think that's something that people like keep forgetting about. Posture is like so important. Like you know, like there's a reason why my mom would like shout at me because like I'm a very tall guy, and she always like shouted at me like, Vid, come on, chest out, bum in, straighten your back. And there's a reason why, because I started getting back problems later on because I would slouch and I wouldn't, like sit properly. And if you do that whilst playing, if you're going to spend hours practicing with like wrong posture and like wrong, like bodily mechanical, let's call it like stances, it's like you're going to drive yourself into something that's going to hurt and eventually again inhibit your playing and therefore inhibit your creativity.
Yeah. And that's something you have to be really careful of in the professional music world, because there is I've read completely insane stats about how many musicians have played through pain.
Oh yeah,
and it's kind of 90% of musicians have played through pain, and there's this fear of, if you admit to being in pain, then you just don't get hired again. So you have to kind of keep pushing through. And you shouldn't be playing in pain, ever. I don't believe there's any instrument where that is a positive aspect of playing.
Oh, never. I think, when you get onto a stage and you start to perform, it needs to be effortless. It needs to be, you being free with your instrument. The last thing you need now is like pain or something like getting in the way of your playing. Something as simple as like, fixing your posture from when you start, playing and performing. That's something that is, even though like I could like point out to guys like, if anybody knows any like old school big band drumming, like Buddy Rich is quite funny because like I think he has like the worst posture imaginable. Like he's hunched over, like he's about to like have a stroke, but he's so good. So like I mean, I don't know. It's always like again he had probably never come from a very like well designed school of like this is what like the modern drumming. What the modern drummer looks like and should do, and it's like they were coming up with this as they were going, and they had knowledge to impart from their mistakes. So when you have these old videos and these old texts of these like really cool cats like talk about, hey, maybe work on your posture. Maybe listen to that and be like, well, there's a reason why they're saying that. They probably played through that pain that you were speaking of earlier, and maybe we should like heed their warnings. Yeah. I don't know. I want to ask you a question. How many times have you had a harmonica student say to you, or let's say they've had a few lessons, and they're like, I've just got some money. I want to buy a really nice harmonica because I think that'll improve my playing, or I'll get better tone out of that. Because you and I are both, we like our gear. We like talking about acquiring gear, but we also know, very well that buying gear doesn't improve your playing. Even though we like to think that, it doesn't improve your playing. I don't know. Have you ever had something like that before?
Have I ever had something like that? I would say that if I had $1 for every time I've had that question from a student, I would have the most enviable gear collection of all time. And we've all fallen into that trap, and I still do. I've just spent the last week completely redesigning my pedal board, and I've spent an uncomfortable amount of money on it, and it's going to make me an amazing musician.
Yeah.
Obviously. I know that that's not true rationally. But I think, coming back to this idea of will gear make you great? The quick answer is no. But I'll add some caveats to that. I think this idea of suffering unnecessarily as a beginner is not healthy, and it's not going to lead to a very good relationship with your instrument. So I do very strongly believe in having a good quality starter instrument. I don't think that a beginner should go out and get a professional grade instrument, whatever they're playing. It's not good for them for so many reasons. So, I mean, one of the, and I know people are going to disagree with me on this from the kind of custom harmonica point of view, but if you go and buy a custom harmonica, it's going to be the same as kind of the classic Hohner Marine Band. Everyone has had a Hohner Marine Band at some point, but a customizer will come along and make it so airtight that you can play it with the absolute minimum amount of breath force, which means that you can get so much nuance out of it. You can get this whole range of dynamic effects from the instrument. And in the hands of a pro, it becomes incredibly musical. Now, there's a very strong argument that some people make, which is that if you hand a harmonica like that to a beginner, they're going to learn how to breathe properly because they're going to learn to play gently for that harmonica.
Yeah.
For me, I think the reality is that they're just going to break that very expensive harmonica because they're going to play too hard, and it's going to break. So yeah, I think it's good to have a good quality instrument, but not a custom or professional grade, because generally professional grade instruments, and it's the same with guitar, they highlight the flaws in your technique.
Yes.
So if your technique is good, they highlight how good it is. So it gives you that extra 5-10% of stardust. But if your technique isn't good, it makes you sound terrible. Whereas a slightly more beginner instrument is going to be very accommodating.
Yes. That is such a, it's like that. It really is. It's like when the line curve graph kind of like goes towards like perfection. It never gets there. It's always an extra 2 to 5% better. But on the opposite axis, you've got this level of risk that keeps increasing if you don't have that technique, if you don't have the basics. Like it's like imagine somebody who's just learned how to play chopsticks on the piano, and now let's buy a Steinway, and then they play chopsticks on a Steinway, and it's like, okay, that's granted, that's a very silly example, but like it immediately highlights like the Steinway is not meant for chopsticks; it's meant for something completely different.
Yeah,
and I think that's what when. I always hear like, oh, I should maybe spend a bit more money on this or that. It's like, maybe work on your left-hand technique first before you buy, a snare drum that you claim is going to make you sound like this. And, oh man, do manufacturers love like selling their products to you? And you're like, oh yeah, if this company or that company says I'll get better, then I need to buy that. I think a lot of you will fall into that trap. And yeah, I think it's very important to go back to the idea of if you can practice, on your basic or good quality basic instrument, it's like that will only make that professional grade gear sound so much better. I think that's something that I strongly believe in.
And I think the thing to remind yourself of is that the great musicians out there, if you put them on your beginner level instrument, they're still going to sound great.
Yes.
And,
oh man, yeah.
And if they don't, then that tells you more about how good they are as a musician.
Yes.
And there's this kind of strange kind of ratio of the higher quality instrument equipment that you get, the more diminishing the returns are of improvement. And when you are that incredibly high level musician and you're striving for that percent better, 2% better, then it's a huge deal to you.
Yes.
But there's 80% of it is your technique.
Yes.
if not more.
Yes.
So if you've got that technique nailed, then whatever you go through is going to sound great, and then you can start chasing the little improvements.
I think that's that, and like talking about technique. It's like technique is a very that takes time. That takes so much time, and it's also something that you will do forever. That you will do forever. But it is the thing that like the basic scales, the basic techniques, especially in harmonica with your breath control and tone and your support, that there will define you as someone who is a good versus a bad harmonica player. But as far as like talking about effective practice, I think that's something that I strongly believe in. Practice as a concept, effective practice as a skill. This is something we've spoken about in our spare time over many coffees, and talking about like this idea of practice. Again, this is mainly for those people who are stuck in that loop and they want to break out and they don't see why they aren't getting better. Practicing is great, but it's also a skill that you need to understand. Even though your instrument is learning, like your instrument is a skill, yes, but it's the art of practice that is a skill within itself that can be applied to everything. Learning how to cook a new meal, learning how to speak a new language. It's like, if you can learn how to practice properly, that will add on to your effective practice. Because I always believe there are like two types of practice. It's the practice that makes you feel good, and the practice that makes you feel like completely miserable. When I come out of a studio and I feel great, like, yeah, I've had a good jam, I feel like I'm grooving hard, I know that I haven't practiced at all. I know that like I just sounded great because I replayed all my best. I highlighted all of my highlights. I didn't highlight any of my lowlights, and we all know we're trying to avoid that because it doesn't make us feel good.
Yeah,
I want to play my instrument to feel good. Yes, but then I never get better if I keep doing that.
but you hit on it with that word that you use, that verb. What is the verb for doing instrument? It's play. And I agree with you that there are two different kinds of practice, but I don't call one of them practice.
Yes,
I call one of them play.
That's a better way of. I think that's a way better way of putting it. Yeah,
and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that the play is important.
Yes,
and I have a handful of students. I don't have as many students as the other kind of students, but I have a handful of students who do practice to the detriment of all else. And they have no pleasure or joy ever from the instrument, which is really sad because there should be joy and pleasure and you should have time to play it. But you should make the conscious decision to do one or the other at a certain time.
Yes. I think so if I go in saying I'm going to practice and then I just play, I need to understand that I have played and not practiced. And you're right. Play is important. I mean, I play a lot in the realm of jazz, and jazz is all about play. People think it's very serious and it's very like broody and cool, but no, it's just people with their instruments playing with their vocabulary in real time.
Yeah.
Jazz solos are just results of play and testing things out and having a good time. Practice is breaking it down clinically and like, well, I need to work on something that's been bothering me, and 9 times out of 10, if anything 10 times out of 10, you are not going to feel good after a practice session. No. You're going to feel like, oh man, I've got so many problems with my playing. But that's good. That means that you have understood where the faults are, and now you can work on them. It's the people who don't hear the faults or don't see the faults. That's when you get stuck in that loop. Yeah. Recognizing that you have a problem. This sounds like we're battling an addiction. Recognizing that you have a problem is the first sign of getting better. But it's true, actually. Yeah. It really is. It really is.
And I think that's a really important element. You spoke about learning how to practice as being a skill in itself. Another thing is learning how to listen to yourself.
Yes.
And listen critically. So I provide feedback on my students playing. And I know that they improve faster if I'm providing feedback because they know what's wrong with their playing. But what I really want them to achieve is the ability to be self-directed. So they can listen to a recording of themselves playing and think, okay, so that 3-draw whole step bend is a little bit flat. I'm now going to go and work on getting the pitch right on that.
Yeah.
And as a musician who is practicing their playing, I think you need to become adept at customizing your own exercises.
Yes.
You know,
Okay.
I can't hand you all the perfect exercises to make you better.
Yeah. We're all different.
I can give you the good beginner stuff to get going, but then every time I start practicing, I'm working on very specific things that are wrong in my playing.
Yes, I agree with you. Yeah, I think that is something that you only really find later on where you can start tailoring your practice to your because at the end of the day, you are your own musician and you get to practice what you want to. Like you said, there's good beginner stuff out there that you can definitely recommend. But after a while, someone's going to be like, well, I like this type of music more. And that requires this kind of a skill more. So I want to check that out. And that's great. That's when all of a sudden the practice becomes focused, not because a teacher has told you what to do. It's because you've gone and checked it out yourself. That's your ear getting better and being like, I want that.
Yeah.
Let me try and get some of that. And that's really cool. That makes me very happy when I see a student do that, when they take their own initiative. I have another thing that I wanted to address with you. And this is quite interesting because you do have an influence in the harmonica world. And my thing is, whenever I see a YouTube video or I see like a learning DVD on an instrument, it doesn't matter which one, let's say, we buy someone a DVD that says, here's this DVD on playing piano like the greats. Check it out. And, and now this person has this DVD or this material and is going to start looking into it. That for me is really interesting because that's the point where things can go really wrong or really well. People always have different interpretations of material. And because you produce a lot of material yourself, what is your advice to people when they listen to you? Because again, it's like, as much as I'd love to say, I know everything, so you should listen to me and you'll sound great. No, that's not that. Lots of teachers have great advice, but lots of teachers also need to like it's a thing. We don't want to produce clones of ourselves. So when someone looks at new material, what's the advice that you give to someone to look at it with an open mind? Because I like to think like, yes, take what you like out of it, but also understand that there are fundamentals being taught, but also be aware that's not gospel. That's not the word of, the thing you're trying to learn.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's part of the difficulty of the very specific thing that I do, which is teaching online. And I think the first element that anyone listening to this who is going onto YouTube to check out any kind of lesson is that a big element of what is being put out there, myself included, is not just education, it's edutainment.
Yes.
We're looking for...
It's a great word.
It's a horrible word. But we're as a YouTube teacher, my goal is yes to teach you, but it's also I want you in my circle. I want you to follow me further and get deeper into my lessons, right?
Yeah.
And I have between 5 and 10 minutes to pique your interest with a video. So you've always got to remember that is an element of what's going on.
Yeah.
And another thing is that YouTube is great for giving, like, everything you could ever need to learn any instrument or any skill is on YouTube. The issue is that you don't get it in the right order.
Yeah.
And that's something that you need to be really aware of and develop the critical faculties to kind of see. I mean, this might not mean anything to you as a drummer or a non-harmonica player, but there's kind of a relatively recent technique in harmonica playing. That I think the first recordings of it were probably, well, the first kind of mainstream recordings were in the 80s.
Okay.
With Howard Levy, Bella Fleck and the Flecktones.
Yes.
So Howard is a total animal on the instrument, and he played something called an overblow.
Okay.
And
I think I have an idea of what that sounds like. It's pretty epic when you
when you nail it, it's great. And what it does is it opens up chromaticisms on a diatonic instrument. So it fills in the blanks, which is fantastic. The issue is that this has become the goal for many, many harmonica players when they first start out, but they don't understand why they want to learn it. But they've seen these YouTube videos, mine included, that say, oh yeah, here's this lesson on how to overblow, and here's this thing you can do with it. And they think, well, that must be the most kind of advanced thing I can work on, and I should do it now.
Yeah. It's almost like people looking at it and they start approaching music like a sport. Like, oh, if I do that, then I'm a pro. It's
exactly that.
It's that thing when there was a big trend on YouTube where it's like, hey, here are the 7 levels of music, and everyone's like, let's see if we can get to level 7. You know? Because people with we play things like video games. We understand the concept of instant gratification. It's like where do I rank myself? And people always think music can be ranked in that kind of way, and I disagree heavily that it can be ranked. But then people see like a thing like, ooh, he can overblow, or in drumming like, oh, he can do a single stroke roll, a single stroke roll like Buddy Rich, and everyone looks at that film Whiplash, and it's like, oh, can you play like that guy from Whiplash? Because then that's like the bar that they set in their minds that is it. That's where you want to be, and that is such a dangerous territory.
It's so dangerous because it's the danger of having a little bit of knowledge and not seeing the full picture.
Yeah.
Because I've spoken to a bunch of amazing harmonica players over the last few months during this podcast series, and one thing that crops up so often is how few of the world's greatest players choose to use overblows. Right? So all these people that we love listening to, they can play the overblows if they wanted to, but they choose not to. And there's a really good reason for that. Generally, it's a tonal choice. An overblow sounds very different to the other notes on a harmonica. And actually, on a harmonica, the nicest thing, as with kind of any wind instrument, is what is the natural breath force going through the instrument sounding like.
Yeah.
And what's the biggest, fattest, warmest sound you can get out of it? And actually, that's really what most people should be focusing on.
Yes. I think it's funny when you mention guys who are serious session players and serious pros, like the guys that get booked for the biggest albums, and sometimes, I don't know what it's like in the harmonica world. I'm sure you guys will have more knowledge on this, but in the drumming world, I'm not going to bore you with names that no one will recognize, but there's like a list of session drummers that people have never heard of, but they play on the records that you listen to, like on the radio, and they're always featured on some Grammy hit, but you don't know their names. And if you listen to what they play, like those guys have the chops to, let's say, the equivalent of an overblow. To like they can shred whatever they want, but they know what's right for the music at the time. I think that comes back to it. It's like, what's the purpose of your practice? What's the purpose of why you want to achieve a tone? Why do you want to achieve an overblow? Is that something you're going to be overusing and annoying everyone at the gig with? Or, is that something to have in your arsenal, for those special occasions?
Yeah.
And, and then what is the important thing to learn? Because at the end of the day, when I go play a gig and someone says, okay, Vid, we're going to do this, and usually it's like, there was either one rehearsal or no rehearsal, and I've just listened to tracks that they've sent me on some Dropbox folder, and now I have to basically do the gig without rehearsal. They want me to play sturdy and straight, and they don't want to feel as though that they're always like they're balancing on a wobbly chair. They want to feel grounded and solid, and that's just playing grooves in solid time, and that my tone is consistent and accurate.
Yeah.
And then that makes them happy. And I know I've done my job well as a musician. And I think that's what people keep forgetting about. Yes, you've got the big flashy moments, but they forget about, but there's the rest of the gig where you need to be solid and you need to be a good band member. I think that's the big thing that we keep forgetting about, that we're all band members. We're not just epic soloists.
That's the thing. And it's this idea of, there's this very basic skill that you probably learnt day one of playing drums.
Yeah.
Like I did lesson one of drums, and I can tap out eighth notes with my right hand on the hi-hat and do kick on 1 and 3 and snare on 2 and 4. And like as someone who's done that lesson as a student, I'm like, okay, I've learned this drum beat. Whereas right? So this is the issue.
Here you go.
You've played it once, therefore you've learnt it, which is just not the case, because you listen to someone like Vid, and I get to play with Vid on occasion, which is a great pleasure. But he'll play that lesson that I learned, lesson 1 of drums. He'll play it all the way through a song, and it'll feel great. But like, I like to think like my favorite drummers are and bassists, rhythm sections basically. They make it feel like I've got scaffolding behind me.
Oh, yeah.
Like however badly out of time I play, it doesn't matter, because I've got these guys making me sound like I'm in time because they're so solid.
Oh, man. There is nothing greater or nicer than sitting with a bassist that is just so on it, because then you just feel like there's this immense level of grounding, and it even like frees up like some of my limbs to like, do some stuff, but it's not necessary.
Yeah.
Like, if you just sit in that pocket.
But how much do you have to play that drum beat that, I mean, I'm assuming you probably teach most students their first lesson
On that beat.
Yeah.
You got to play that beat for years. You got to play. It's funny that, for the guys listening that don't know which beat I'm talking about,
Beat it.
Beat it, or Billie Jean. It's it's and that's it. That's the whole groove.
Yeah.
And people think, well, that's simple. But when you hear different players approach that groove, and you're like, how does he make that simple beat sound so good? I mean, like you and I have a massive respect for a man like Steve Jordan. He plays that groove consistently well.
Yeah.
And he's on, and it's like, I know when guys book Steve Jordan, they book him for that groove.
Yeah.
It's like, we want that groove on our record. And that's something that for me is like, my musical goal is to have a voice on that simple groove where people are like, yeah, the way Vid plays that groove, like I want people to say that about me. That's like, I think that's where your musical character comes out.
Yeah.
But that only comes out years later. I mean, I like, as far as a professional gigging drummer, I don't think I'm nearly as versed as I don't think I have 10% of the stuff that my drumming heroes have. But I don't think, like, I still need time. I still need to play that groove for years and years until I can, until it does something.
Yeah.
And I think that's what, again, going back to the topic of practice, playing it once doesn't mean you know it. Playing it twice, playing it 3 times, playing it for 5 years, 10 years later, that becomes a part of your system. That becomes a part of your vocabulary. I can't do things that I've done once on demand. I have a solid belief that when people talk about confidence, what is the idea of confidence? Confidence is the concept of knowing you're going to deliver something without thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's like, I know I can take a sip of my coffee right now. There, there, it's in there. I didn't have to think about it. I know I can do that. But when I have to think about it or I have to stress about it, that means I'm not confident. It's the same thing with playing. If you can do it whenever, like on demand, that is the result of years of practice.
Yeah.
And that will take time. And I want people to understand it will take time. It will take that long. You know, if you watch guys on YouTube or wherever and they're young and they're doing this thing that nobody else can do, it's like that's because they spent the time. There's no get rich quick scheme here. It takes time and effort, unfortunately. But that's the beautiful thing about it. You spend time on it. You spend time on your craft.
Absolutely. Okay, so we are back after a brief comfort break. So we were talking about this idea of kind of seemingly simple concepts which take years and years, decades to refine. And I think this is where it's kind of important that we start talking about different types of practice and how to practice. Because I think there's an initial period when you learn something of just learning how to do it.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very mechanical thing. It's like, how do I coordinate all these things just to be able to do it?
Yeah.
And once you can do that, you're then going to refine it.
Yes.
And then when you refine it, you're going to learn how to do it from memory, for argument's sake. And then you're going to work on building up the muscle memory. So I think it's important to kind of think about what these different steps are and how they work. Because I think a lot of people, they sidestep certain areas. So they will learn how to do it and then jump straight to working on the muscle memory by doing loads and loads of reps.
Yeah.
I think everyone knows that to practice, you have to do loads of reps. But that's all everyone knows.
Yes. Oh man, this is something that I've been a culprit of when I started out practicing. I realized that I did a lot of. I learned. So when we talk about muscle memory, so that first step, if we talk about the concept of learning a new action is mechanically different to what your body's ever done. So if you're learning a certain technique with your mouth, with your hands, with your feet, like that is going to be new to you, and it's going to feel miserable in the first couple of weeks. And you might get the sound out every now and then, but then what happens is you'll get that sound and you'll do it again and you'll do it again, and you're like, okay, I've got it now. I've learned the thing, and now you start doing repetitions on the sound you've learned rather than the technique itself. For example, I'll talk about drumming in a very basic sense to kind of like give you an idea. If we look at the single stroke roll, anyone can do it, is right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. And you just go around and around and you get faster. And that gives you your single stroke roll. What you don't learn, or what many drummers don't learn, is that the single stroke roll can also start on your left. So left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. So when you practice, you're supposed to practice your right and your left hand. Now, I'm sure in harmonica there are parallels that you can look at. But if we look at doubles now, for instance, doubles are right, right, left, left, right, right, left, left. But doubles can also be left, left, right, right, left, left, right, right. And what a lot of drummers do, they never learn. If they're right-handed, they'll never learn the left. So when I ask them, give me a roll starting on the left hand, it is so much weaker. And that is the concept of, I've learned something and I've learned a part of it. I've learned a part of the sound that I like, and then you go straight to muscle memory.
Yeah.
But then you've learned a bad habit. I like my right hand is stronger than my left. No.
Yeah.
It's like, even though, not all drummers are ambidextrous. I can guarantee that I'm not ambidextrous. My left hand is severely weaker than my right, but I always work on it. I always try and get it to be as strong as my right. But like people skip out those 2 or 3 stages because it's more effort, it's more time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most fun part of learning is that first stage.
Yeah.
Because you've learned something new and you're like, wow, I've got this new skill. It's great. I mean, that's why starting a new activity is so fun.
Yes.
Learning a new activity is so much fun. And as a music teacher, my goal is to kind of trick people to have invested so much time in having fun at the beginning that they then keep going because it gets less and less fun. Learning an instrument gets less and less fun because the hard work starts.
Yeah.
At the beginning, you've got all these micro skills that need to come together to be able to do anything whatsoever. So every day you feel like you're achieving something because there's an action that you couldn't do before that you're starting to be able to do. The issue is that you then have to refine it, which is a lot less sexy.
Yeah, it's very true. I think that's a very good term of putting it. It's not sexy refining something. It's not fun when you start you pull out the sandpaper and you're gonna start working on those edges to get them completely smooth and to get them to the point where you have to get them to shine. If anyone's ever done woodwork, for instance, you first have your basic block. It's a block of wood, and then and let's say we're making some sort of an animal. If you can cut out the legs and the head and the body, okay, I have this animal-shaped thing, but it's not the animal. Then you start adding the details, and that's where you start getting into step 2, where you're you're cutting out the eyes and the nose and the mouth, and then some texturing starts to happen. Then we get to the polishing and the buffing, and that is the refining technique of this is now going to look immaculate. And this is where people get I've seen many people just be like, oh yeah, I've just made this thing and it's not great, but I like it. And that's great. I'm happy that people like it. But if that same carpenter comes to me and says, I just want to sound better, or no, I want to make better things with wood. I'm like, well, you're not spending time on it.
Yeah.
You're not buffing and polishing as much as you should. It's a very silly comparison, but yeah, I've been down this road, and I've had to unlearn the mistakes that I have put myself in. That I need to, I had to fix my left hand at some point. I had to be like, okay, Vid, as much as you don't like this, you're working on your left hand twice as much as your right, and it got better, but it took time.
Yeah, I think that thing of I always talk about muscle memory doesn't judge you. So muscle memory is just a recorder. Yes. So whatever you put into it, they'll be like, okay, we're going to learn how to do this exactly the way you're doing it, good or bad. Your brain is going to say, I'm going to learn how to do this like this, so that you don't have to think about it, which is brilliant. That's why we can all, feed ourselves, walk down the street relatively confidently. Yeah. We have control of our bodies to a certain extent because muscle memory has enabled us to do that. Whereas if you kind of look at a baby right at the beginning, everything is an effort. They can't even swallow.
Yeah.
They have to learn every little thing, and then muscle memory takes over. And I think you forget how many things you've just completely internalized using that incredibly powerful tool. And I think the more time you spend on the earlier stages of practice, learning and then refining, the easier it is to make the later stages more effective.
And your mindset will change. I think the way you approach music will no longer be, well, it will happen naturally. It's like when you first start learning words, you first start learning how to speak in sentences. Then, first the sentences come out of necessity. I need food. So you ask, I need food, and then you get food. Great, awesome. Then you start learning about, sentences can have meanings and implications. Like, I like food. Oh, he likes food. Okay, I've learned something about this person. Then I start stringing sentences together into stories. And all of a sudden, you can think conceptually with a language. My favorite solos are the ones that tell stories. My favorite solos or my favorite instrumentalists are the guys that can paint a picture musically. it's like it sounds very artsy, but it's true. Like guys who have the technique down can start speaking their language on a concept that's not just look at this scale, look at this finger technique, look at this what I'm doing. No, they're on a different plane, and if you have everything down, you can start to think, well, I can tell a story with my instrument. But but again, that like you first need to say your first word, your first sentence, string your first concept together, and then you can start telling stories. And that is a result of the refining process.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the big thing to bring into this is the idea that practice doesn't make perfect, but conscious practice does, and it's bringing this this mindset of how am I doing this current action? What can I do better? What's good? Because I think it's very easy for musicians to become too self-critical, and that can be crippling.
Oh, yes.
I think you need to give yourself props where they're due. You know, like I have worked on my timing. My tone sucks, but my timing is getting a lot better. I'm more solid on that. So maybe I'm going to spend some time working on the tone now. But developing that critical faculty is absolutely essential. And I'm going to completely destroy this quote, but basic premise: this great violinist said, if you practice with your fingers, you'll have to practice all day. But if you practice with your mind, you'll do it in a couple of hours. And
yeah, I agree with that.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? You know, we have this image of like amazing child prodigies learning to play an instrument, and they have to practice 7-8 hours a day, and that's why they get better. Whereas if you actually think consciously while you're playing and refine it, use your brain as well as your muscles, you'll improve a lot faster.
I agree. I think that is a very important thing that you just said there. Actively looking at why you're working on something. Let's say I'm working on, I don't know, a hand technique on the drumstick. Now, let's say the stick goes up and down, and and you start thinking, okay, well, why is my wrist moving this way? Why are my fingers moving that way? Why, how do I learn this effectively? And everybody will tell you slow motion. You start slow. Never attack something fast, because your brain can't think that fast yet. Your brain is still trying to get to grips with what is going on mechanically. It's the whole concept. You can't run before you walk. I think actively sitting with your instrument, going through it slowly, and understanding each note, understanding where that note fits on your scale when you work on your scales, or focusing on the tone. Make sure every hole you blow into when you play a harmonica is the tone you want, right? That, because we have this thing where if we play like it's a drum rudiment called it's called a paradiddle, right, left, right, right, and the right, the last two strokes, that's called the diddle, the paradiddle, right, left, right, right, and people always think that, okay, well, if I've got my single and then my double at the end, I'll just kind of fluff it, and that's called crushing your diddle. And so many guys crush their diddles, and like the first two strokes always sound great, but then the second two always kind of like fall flat. But if you play it fast enough, nobody will hear. But that's where the first bad habit starts to come in. You're ignoring a critical part. That is what makes the sound of that paradiddle. And I'm sure in harmonica playing, it's like people will avoid certain scales or certain notes, or the notes in between, let's say the chord tones or something that will make it sound bad, but they think, I don't have to look at that. We always like to, we like to cherry pick our practicing.
Yeah.
It's well, those things sound great, but what about the things that don't sound great? Work on that. Fix that. Make everything sound great. That's
the thing. I mean, cherry picking your practice is actually really great and really important, but you got to do exactly the opposite of what you want to do.
Yes.
So, if I was doing, the practice that would give me the most pleasure, I would sit and wail on a 4-drawer on my harmonica over a backing track through a loud amplifier, and I would just feel like the bomb.
You just feel great. Woo!
And I'm sure everyone can relate to that if you play harmonica. But that's not the thing that's going to make me a better player, because I think most players discover that trick very early on. That's what's known as a wailing note, because you can just wail on it. and what you should be thinking is like, what am I avoiding? What's the thing that I always say, oh, I don't do this?
Yeah.
It's like, I remember having a jam session a while ago, and this guitarist asked to get up on stage, and I said, cool, come up on stage. And I started explaining to him what the chord progression was and what the groove was. And he said to me, oh, I don't play rhythm. I don't need to know that stuff. And I was just like, oh, dude, if you want to take that super awesome solo that you want to take, you're also going to have to play rhythm. And I now know where your biggest weakness is.
Gosh. I sometimes tell my students, especially the guys who've been playing for years, if I get some intermediate guys in, and I'll tell them that we've got to clean the attic, and they look at me like, what? It's like, no, like that's the phrase I use for, because we all have a mental attic. Because if we're being honest, what do people use the attic for? For the more organized, it's storage. For the less organized, and our brains are very, very unorganized, we throw away stuff up there just because we don't want it in the house. We don't want it, we don't want it downstairs. So we'll just throw it in the attic, and no one will ever see it. But the problem is, if you go do a proper spring clean, you will find everything you've been throwing away for years and years and years. And that is what I have to tell my intermediate students. We got to clean the attic. I see problems with this and that, and these holes in your foundations that were never actually addressed. I had that when I first went to conservatoire. I was like, my drum teacher was like, I see holes the size of Brazil. We got to fix this now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm terrible. But if I didn't do that, I never would have reached the musical goals that I set myself. So clean your attics, people. That is something I'm a heavy believer in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're starting to sound quite pushy and perfectionist about being a musician, and that's not the way to think about it. I think so. Have you ever done Tai Chi?
I've seen people do it.
All right, okay. So I mean, the basic. I did maybe 3 or 4 months of lessons of Tai Chi. So I'm by no means an expert, but what I picked up in that period was that basically you learn the form, which is something like 140 moves.
Oh my goodness.
You learn that in a relatively short period of time, maybe a year or whatsoever. But then you spend the rest of your life refining it. And we've spoken about this before, while we're playing chess and drinking coffee.
We just sound like two very old guys.
Yeah. There's no video, so for all intents and purposes, we're two very old guys who sit and drink coffee and play chess. But yeah, we music is very simple.
Yes.
The building blocks of music are incredibly simple. The different permutations you can get out of that are limitless.
Endless, yeah.
And it's boundless creativity, which is fabulous. But it is still a very kind of limited basic set of rudiments, no matter what instrument you're playing.
Yes.
If you have those completely down,
oh man,
you're going to be a monster on the instrument. But you shouldn't feel bad about having to go back to those foundations.
Yeah.
Every time I start with a new teacher, I have to go back to my foundations and fix things and that they've noticed that someone else didn't notice, or they think, okay, well, actually, if you approach this way, then that's gonna help you do that thing that sounds really complicated, but actually it's just down to having correct breathing. And it is just these very kind of simple things at the foundation that change everything.
Oh man, that is so true. Like, like talking about our chess thing, like that's a very good. That's like we spoke about this earlier when we played a couple of times. It was, like I'm not good at chess. I think Tomlin's kicking my butt right now in our overall streak. But the thing that what I like about chess is that it's a bit like music. The moves are simple. Like pawns move like this, knights move like that, and let's see the infinite number of possibilities that can come from that. Music is like that. Conventional Western well-tempered music has 12 tones. If you master those 12 tones, what can you compose with that? What can we compose with, basic rhythmic concepts, and like, it's those guys. It's like, I always like looking at, like drumming instructional videos. And there was one guy that popped up. I introduced you to him a little bit earlier, Mark Juliana, and he talks about like taking the simplest concepts, and mastering the simplest, and that's what annoys me. It's like, I thought he had some magical, mantra that like, oh, if I just do that, I'll be just like him. But he's like, no, it's like, if I take 5 notes, boop, 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 boop. Cool. That was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I play the first one loud, the second one soft, the third one not as loud, and then, and then I go ba 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 ba, and then ba 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 ba, and then you kind of start seeing of all of these combinations. I'm like, oh man, just 5 notes alone, I have combinations of dynamic, and now I can play them in a different meter. I can play them in a different time signature. It's like, oh man, and he understood that as like, just in basic parameters, there is so much. Because we see basic parameters as like, oh no, we just need to learn how to play that note and then we know it. No, you can put that anywhere in music. And that's what separates those guys from the rest. I'm not saying be like them. No, I'm saying we can all learn something from that. Sometimes a super simple basic concept. If you can make a super simple basic concept very difficult, that means you're learning something. And that is the wonderful, unlimited potential of music that is so beautiful, I think.
I think you put it perfectly. I think we should probably start thinking about wrapping this up. I mean, we talk about music and practice all the time, and this is why we wanted to do this podcast. But I'd love to know kind of what are your guidelines for someone who's never played an instrument before? They've started coming to lessons with you. How do you suggest that they approach practicing? What are the most important things in your mind? It doesn't have to be drum specific, is it? About practice.
Oh no, for sure. So I think the most important thing is like, understand why you're playing. Why are you like why did you decide to come to a drum lesson? Why did you decide to take up or any lesson for that matter? Why are you here? Why do you want to learn? Why do you want to play? It's fun. You love it. You enjoy it. Amazing. So there's obviously that criteria. When you start practicing, understand that there are going to be times where it's not going to be the most fun, but when you start to achieve and you start to hit those goals of like, you can play your first song, you can play your first suite, you can play your first solo, that's when it gets really fun. And just keep your eye on that goal. And the only way you're going to get to that level of your musical goal, like, it doesn't matter what goal you set. It can be something like crazy, crazy virtuoso-esque, or it could be, something as simple as, I want to play Smoke on the Water, and be really good at it. Great. I love both those goals, because you know what you want. Knowing what you want is very important, but then understand that when you start practicing, be mindful of your practice. Be mindful of the hours you're putting in. Don't keep wasting your time with something that's not going to get you to your goal. And, understand it will take time, but, and there will be days where it will suck and it won't feel good, but you're getting there. So be mindful of effective practice. You want to do effective practice. If you're a busy person, you have a full schedule, you have barely time to squeeze in time to go to the gym or to cook dinner. But let's say you have 10 minutes. Spend 10 minutes practicing, effective practicing, mindful of every note, of every motion, of every mechanic. That 10 minutes will go a lot further than an hour of mindful jamming. Mindful jamming is fun. Remember, that's great. But understand you're jamming. You're not practicing. So that is something I want to leave people with.
Awesome. I think, that's a great final thought. And I'm just going to add two elements to that. So first one, this sounds silly, but eat your vegetables before you have your dessert.
Always.
So start the session with what you don't want to be doing, and get it out of the way. So if it's that really boring technical exercise that you know is good for you, but you don't particularly want to do that first, and then reward yourself with play.
Yeah, definitely.
And then final I think this is the most important thing, certainly in my practice, and a lot of neuroscience backs this up. Sleep is one of the most important, probably the most important elements of practice.
Yes.
And to get the most kind of effectiveness out of your practice and your sleeping is to do regular practice, so that in between each practice session, you can have a period of sleep where your subconscious processes everything, and then you can come back to it the next day and refine, and keep doing that try and do the majority of days in the week.
Yeah.
So if you can do 10, 15 minutes a day, 4 or 5 days a week versus 1 hour on Sunday.
Yeah. Oh, man.
You've got 4 or 5 sleeps where you've processed your practice, and it's much easier. It's so much easier than trying to get good doing 1 hour a week.
Regular intervals, that is a lifesaver. And also the holistic approach, I think, is kind of like what you're harking on about. A holistic approach to practice, being healthy, having a good mindset, all of those things play into practice and will help you become a better musician.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Vid. This has been an absolute pleasure.
It has been. Thank you. And thank you for the coffee.
Oh, my pleasure. And I'm going to put some links to Vid's site and stuff in the show notes, and also post a link to a lesson that he did over at Tomlin Harmonica School, which was a lot of fun.
Oh, that was fun.
And I'm sure we'll do some more in the not too distant future.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Take it easy. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Tomlin's Harmonica Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating and review on your podcast player of choice. Join me next Monday for the next episode. Happy harping!